Welcome, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Streaming Dreaming Tech. And welcome to our weekly discussion about how to deal with streaming, how to deal with Zoom, how to deal with technology in this ever-changing world, in the environment that we're in, and how that will work. I'm just setting the hosts up. This is always the fun of this bit. It's like I'm trying to talk and do two things, of which everybody will tell you I can only do one thing at one time. So hopefully I've now passed over the hosts and I can carry on with what I was going to say. This is the opportunity for you, the people out there watching this, to ask us questions that you want to know about how to deal with the technology, how to move yourself forward, and how to deal with synagogue services and other times that you broadcast in the environment, the Jewish environment that we're all in. First of all, before we go there, I'd like to introduce our panel of the people who are going to be answering the questions and taking and helping you out today. First up I have is Rabbi David Paskin.
Hi, everybody. I'm David, your Torah tech guy, and I'm really happy to be here with everyone again.
And next up I have Rabbi Tobias Moss. I'm going to stop on the rabbi bit after this.
Thanks, Leo. I am a rabbi in Minneapolis at Temple Israel here, and doing a bunch of social media and video production and hybrid worship planning.
Next up we have is Oren.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Oren Steinitz, Rabbi in Elmira, New York. Small, unaffiliated congregation. Happy to be back.
Joining us on the panel this week from Israel, we have Ari.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be on the panel. I am calling in from Israel. I am not a rabbi. I deal with virtual events and various community services.
Joining us from literally the other side of the time zone world is John.
Good morning, good evening. I'm a retired professor emeritus, and been involved in distance learning, distance education. I am not a rabbi.
Thank you. And the final person to introduce you to, and he will be doing the session that we're going to have in a few minutes' time, is Brett.
Hi, my name is Brett Tancer. I'm a rabbi in Florida. I'm currently serving a congregation going on almost 10 years. And I get to talk to you today about all the fun stuff that we've done in the last bunch of years. I'm happy to be here.
If there is anybody who is watching in the attendees who is due to join the panel, please just raise your hand so we can add you in if you wanted to join into there. So today we've got a really interesting panel discussion that is going to be first led off by Brett, talking about various different technologies that enable you to share liturgy, and the key one that we're going to be talking about is ProPresenter. But there's lots of questions that are out there. People are moving forward in what they're doing. We would really like you to put in your questions in Slido. The link is there for Slido. All you have to do is go to that website, slido.com, or just scan the thing with your iPhone or Android phone, the QR code, and then it's Dreaming Tech DT 5781 if you need the code to put in. And ask your questions. There is a number of other people we're hoping will join a bit later on some other areas, but please enter your questions. This is your opportunity to drive what we talk about. On that, I'm now going to hand over to Brett, who's going to talk the first session for us. Brett, take it away.
So, hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking today about ProPresenter. A couple of weeks ago, I was on the panel and I had to leave early to set up for an in-person concert, doing some of the AV. And I think the minute that I logged off, Leo got a question about ProPresenter. To my knowledge, and that is changing, I was, I think, the first person, at least in the Jewish world, to start using it. We're going to talk about what it is in a second. I was also asked to give an overview of its features. And I believe my reaction to that, my response to that was that that is a terrible, terrible idea. And I'm going to tell you why. It's incredibly difficult to imagine what is possible and what is out there when your only frame of reference is like PowerPoint or Keynote. This software does a lot of things. It is a very complicated, it is a very robust, it is an amazing piece of software, and also, right, on any given day, I can completely hate it and the people who made it. I don't work for the company. I've just been using it for a long time now. I'm not going to jump in and show you what it looks like just yet. I want to tell you a story. I think the story will actually help everyone to understand a little bit of what it does, and why I made the move to switch to it.
Brett, you're a little bit quiet. You're just a little bit quiet.
Let's try that. Better? All right. So before I was a rabbi, I was a song leader. And as a song leader, my mindset is that I would always like people to participate in a given service. And giving them the words is very helpful if you would like them to sing along or read along. And so about 8 years ago or so, I had already been using PowerPoint for a long time. We had been supplementing the service and the prayer book with either a song sheet, right, or a slideshow, essentially in PowerPoint. This is not like, it's not new, it's not revolutionary. At the time, like, it was being used at a number of the summer camps across the country, at least URJ summer camps. And we had a number of us, a folder with all of the songs that you could imagine, just kind of crammed in. Each song had a PowerPoint file. And so when you wanted to make a song session, what you would do is you would open that file, you would copy all of the slides, and then you would create that particular day and just start pasting one after another. If this sounds familiar to a lot of you, PowerPoint still operates this way, right? PowerPoint doesn't operate as I get to choose which components I want and insert them in a very simple way. It's all or nothing, right? I have to include all the words. The other thing that happened around this time is that I realized that the way that we were displaying things was maybe not the best way. Right, in any given service, for instance, way back when, every Friday night or every Saturday required a song sheet. And that song sheet changed from week to week because the service completely changed from week to week. And any supplements would need to be created on the fly, essentially for that particular service. And I wasn't keeping those sheets. I was not keeping like that combination of readings and whatever additional melodies were not in the prayer book. I was throwing them away because saving 200 song sheets with that combination for the next time that perhaps we would use them was, we would have run out of space very quickly. And so from week to week, I would make song sheets. And we started to notice that we were using tens of thousands of pieces of paper a year. And that is a lot. And so we didn't particularly want an entire forest dedicated to participation during a worship service. And so we started to use the PowerPoints more and more. Now, the big change that I made was that rather than just including the text for a particular melody, I started to include word for word what was being sung, what was being said. Now, below, oh, it's usually there. I don't see the subtitles this week, but normally at the bottom of my screen, I get to see the subtitles, and as one of us speaks, it's translated into text. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it is very, very not right. But that was not something that I had available at the time. Now, anyone who's been using PowerPoint knows that it has some limitations and that the software has not changed so much over the course of the last, let's say, 10 years. So for instance, way back when, I liked my presentations to be pretty, to be fancy. So I was throwing in a background on every slide. I was, from time to time, throwing in video clips. And depending on the size of the video clip, in any given week, PowerPoint could decide that it just didn't like that and would crash. File sizes began to grow as what we were doing needed to look more impressive, if that makes sense. And some of you have spent a lot of time creating your own presentations, and you know what that's like. I then learned that people were using motion backgrounds. And that means that instead of like a 2 megabyte file for a picture, a background image, it could be like 100 megabytes for a particular motion background that spanned a number of slides. I think the largest file size that I had was a Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur service maybe 6-7 years ago. And we got up to just above 2 gigabytes. Now, the computer that it was running on was a very, very, very powerful i7. It had like 64 gigs of RAM. It had dual video cards with more memory than I think all the computers in my house combined have. And PowerPoint would crash. It did not like it. And at a certain point, I started to realize that no matter what I wanted PowerPoint to be, it was never going to end up being what I needed. And I was going to end up being constrained by the limitations of the software. The other piece to that was that PowerPoint had, at the time, I believe it still does actually, a few very major limitations that I could not get past. So we underwent a renovation project in which, like many of you are doing now, we installed 4 PTZs in our sanctuary. We installed screens on either side of the bima facing the congregation. Later, after the project was finished, we started adding more things. So we now have screens that face the bima so that we can see things. But PowerPoint is limited by the number of screens that it can output to. And at the time, that number was 2. And anything above 2, and the computer got very, very unhappy. It didn't matter whether I was using all the screens. If I had 3 screens plugged in as outputs, PowerPoint just like decided randomly what screens things would be displayed on. You have presenter view, you have your presentation. Sometimes they would swap screens. Sometimes no screens would appear. Sometimes it would just be a combination of gobbledygook. And so I started hunting around to see what else was available. Now, we were invited to a mega church in our area. And we went and we sat for their service and we watched and we listened, and it's very impressive. They have screens everywhere. And this was still 7 years ago. They had screens everywhere. The kind of presentations and slides that we were seeing, they did use motion backgrounds. They had the words for everything that was being shared. If the band was singing anything, the lyrics were up on the screen at all times. Now, the difference between lyrics and the subtitles, which Zoom is going to translate for us, is a lot, right? Zoom doesn't know what I'm about to say, but a team of people put together the slides that were for any particular song. The slides were there for the sermon, where the pastor wanted to quote something from the Bible, and suddenly on the screens, a picture of a Bible popped up, and there was the passage. I had never seen anything quite like it outside of TV production, or a very fancy, for the time, concert venue. We were invited back to see how all the magic happened. And they had a room in a different building where there were 20 different people who were in charge of just the slides. So the first thing was, this was never going to be anything that I had, right? I was never going to have an army of people creating the content. They also had more than $1 million worth of computer hardware in order to make that happen. Everything from video to audio, all of the integrations, everything worked seamlessly, and it boggled my mind at the time. Now, the software that they were using to run their service was called ProPresenter, or ProPresenter 6 to be exact. ProPresenter has been around for a long time. It was designed originally by a couple of guys in a basement who were working for a church and realized that there was no software on the market that did exactly what they needed for their services. And so they created it. And in versions 1 through 5, there were a lot of hiccups, but there were also a lot of breakthroughs. And slowly, many congregations in the church world, right, began to use the software. And it's because it deals with things like a particular service component very differently than PowerPoint. Just like all of you have had to copy probably the slide of the Avot Ve'imachot, right, countless number of times as you create your worship service for a week. They treat each component as a separate component. So the Avot Ve'imachot is not like slide 37, or in some cases slides 37 through 42, depending on how you have things displayed. The Avot Ve'imachot was a song that you added to a playlist. And so their file sizes were not getting very big. The other thing that it did was, instead of making me add a background for every single slide, I could just put a background into the system. And until I told the system I didn't want to use that background, that was the background for everything. I also knew, having had created PowerPoint galore with all of the Hebrew wonderfulness that comes with it, that the undertaking to move to something like this was going to be a major task. And so what I'm about to show you is both a miracle of the modern age and also like an extreme cautionary tale for everyone watching. Although, because of the way the software operates now, I think less of a cautionary tale for all of you. So I got to learn all of the things not to do very early on. And as the new versions of the software have come out, its abilities have grown significantly. So what's the difference between ProPresenter and something like PowerPoint? So I already told you about the playlist, and I'm going to show you in a sec. I know, like, I can see the faces of some of the people on the panel. They want to see it. The software is available for Windows and for Mac. It used to be that Windows was the second child who is not necessarily equal to the first child. They have tried to fix that in the latest version. I can tell you that one of the things that they have yet to fix is some support for Hebrew. I learned the hard way after a lot of time making slides, so many slides, that Windows, it just didn't really like it. It was never going to be as good as the Mac version of it because they designed it for Mac and that was their original priority. To the extent that like Rabbi Steinitz, who's on the panel, I convinced him, I brought him over to the dark side of ProPresenter. And so he wanted to buy it and wanted to use it for his worship services. And he was prepared to buy a Windows machine. And I told him not to, and made a very not Apple loving person buy a new Mac M1.
I will never forgive you for that.
I know, I appreciate it. I'm okay with it. So the software can do a lot. And actually the things that we've been discussing on this panel the last, say, 4 sessions, it has integrations for all of them inside the software itself. So they've added the ability to stream. They've added the ability to do some basic audio and video editing, pulling in seamlessly and very easily video clips that PowerPoint would have glitched on, that PowerPoint would have crashed on, that the video quality would have not been very high. I'm able to display HD video and above very easily. So I'm actually going to show you this on a Windows machine because I figured it would be fun, and I want you to see what the difference is. The biggest issue, oh, look at, no, it's still there. I upgraded to the latest version just before the show started. So here, this is what the software looks like. And I made, you can all see this window over here to the right-hand side. It's a big black window. I've made this window very big. One of the amazing features about the software was that once upon a time, when I made slides for our sanctuary, those slides could not easily be put or added to a stream, whether it was a live stream, which I use during my services, but even now during religious school for our kids, we use Zoom, right? I want to be able to send a signal to the main screens in the sanctuary, and I want to also be able to send a different looking set of lyrics to Zoom, hopefully not taking over the entire screen. So this is the first thing that we've got. This is a background. It's a, I think, a motion background. Let's see. Nope. This is a picture. We'll do motion in a second. But this picture is going to appear as a background on every slide until I tell it not to. It doesn't matter what slide I click on. The background is just there. I don't have to insert it, which is beautiful. Oh, I gave away the surprise. If you're looking at my screen, the lyrics probably just immediately popped up on the bottom in what are called lower thirds.
Just, Brett, so put this into context. This is running on one computer. It's not necessarily running on the broadcast computer that you're actually streaming out on.
No, I'm on a very not broadcast computer that gets very angry.
But for people who are watching this, they can understand that you're running ProPresenter on one machine, and you can bring it into the picture that is Brett delivering on out to Zoom, Teams, or out into the room as well.
So before before integrations and before NDI and before a lot of other things, the way that I was getting around the people at home not having the words, because at least 5 years ago, the Sidurim in my sanctuary stayed under the pews or in the pews, and we never took them out. We started to use everything was on the screens. And what I would do is the box that you see, I wanted to not do that. Let's do this. Silly OBS. The box that you see on the right-hand side, I would take this box, I would shrink it down, I would pull it into the system as an HDMI signal and have a little box that duplicated what was on my main screens at the bottom of the screens that people were watching at home for the stream. It was an easy way for me to do it. And at the time, the only way to add lower thirds was through keying, which meant that I needed not one person running slides, but two.
Okay, but now with the advent of where we are with NDI, because I mean, for most people who are going to be starting this, in fact, everybody's going to be starting this, they're not starting from where you were 5 years ago.
So no. And
so what
true.
do they need to do today?
So today, you are able to create multiple appearances for the slides that you have. So for instance, on my main screens, I want it to look like this, right? I want it to have a background. I want it to be full-size text. For the people at home, though, I want it to look more like this. And the text size is your preference. Like I made it this size because I wanted people to really be able to participate at home. And this was the size that I found was the best. Now,
and the advantage you have is you're using both things are appearing at the same time. Exactly. So what people are seeing at home is this. I don't know why. It may be just me, but you've got it reversed. Reversed Hebrew is the hardest thing I think I've ever seen in my life.
Right,
because I just don't know which way around. Your Zoom window is the wrong way around. But we get the point. We get the point. So you're able to put that on the screen to people at home, and at the same time, the people in the room, the roomies, are going to be seeing that one, and the two are synced together. That's the key. Is that what you're saying?
So
Great.
everything is synced together, and it allows us to have one person running essentially the lyrics or the words for whatever you're using, a reading, a prayer, a song. Everything is displayed in multiple places at once. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Just like in PowerPoint, you have presenter view. This is the equivalent in ProPresenter, which is called a stage display. A stage display allows me to choose what I want to see as the person leading the service. And so in this case, I would like this first slide, and I want next slide. I want to know what's coming, but I can completely customize this. So for instance, if I would like, let's go here. I want, for instance, to see a live slide. I can see a live slide. If instead of a live slide, I would like a clock or a timer so that the rabbi knows how long he's been talking and knows when to wrap it up, hopefully, because service has been going on too long. I see your face, Oren. It's okay. I can choose that I want the timer to be there. I can do a countdown timer. I can do an elapsed timer. I can choose whatever the appearance is. I know this is a lot of information for most people because you're used to seeing things in a very PowerPointy kind of way. This took 5 years. This took more than 5 years to be able to get to a place where this made sense. The other thing that I'm able to do.
So if I just unpack that slightly, Brett, so I can understand it from other people. I'm seeing this as it's like when you're sitting there watching an orchestra. Every single person out there in the orchestra have got different pieces of music because they've got the bits that they need to see for them to play the notes that they need for their instrument. And what you're saying is you've got a master sheet here that you say, as for the rabbi is going to be seeing this with these timers on it. The people at home are going to be seeing this with this information. People in the room are going to be seeing this. And people in the creche, which is next door, are going to be seeing a slightly different version, even sort of with a flashing up thing. And I mean, the shamases could be seeing a thing that says, you know, we're standing up in a minute, or where you can open the doors, or that sort of thing. You can add all of this into one.
Everything is.
Let's call it a playbook or something. I don't know.
Everything is in the playbook. They've even gone so far now as to add. Let's say you have musicians playing on any given service, and maybe they didn't rehearse or even look at the music before they got there. I can put up chord sheets for the band so that their view is just to see that, while everyone else is looking at the words.
Got it. We've got a number of questions coming in already, Brett, which we'll go to shortly, because I want to keep the things rolling forward. If you've got some questions for this in particular about how ProPresenter works, please put them into the Slido. Add them in. We've got quite a lot of questions coming up, and vote and downvote the questions that are already in there. That's your choice to choose which questions we take in which order.
So
back to you, Brett.
I wanted to show everyone just kind of how it works. For every melody, essentially, that we use during any particular service of a year, I have created various versions of any particular prayer. So Lechado D has like 25 different Lechado Ds that we may be using, and each one is exactly the way you would sing it. So the days of having to say, for instance, that on a particular prayer, it's 3 lines up from the bottom in the prayer book and 4 lines in from the right-hand side. Every word that is sung, every word that is spoken is here, and I can create essentially what are called arrangements for it. So, for instance, if you look, let's make this a little bit bigger. So here's Vishamru, and this is a Vishamru melody that most congregations will be familiar with. Come back. Where'd it go? There we go. So if you look, it says chorus. It says verse. This was designed with songs in mind, but it still works for what we do. So for instance, there's a refrain of Vishamru in between each one of the verses. And so instead of having to create a different version of this prayer every time, what I can do is I can tell it, maybe I only want to do verse 1 this week. And so I'm going to create an arrangement of it. And let's say 1 verse. Now it's going to go chorus, and it will automatically add a duplicate of that section. Then I would like verse 1. I'm going to get rid of the other 2 verses. I'm going to add in my choruses at the end.
That's a great feature.
It's amazing. The amount of time that it saves, right? Just being able to do things like when I don't want to pray for dew anymore and I want the rains to come, I have it set in here. So Marid Hatal or Marid, it's everything that I want is available to me as a choice. So I would like the normal version of Vishamru with all of the fixings. I would like to just use 1 verse this week, and it automatically adapts to what I've told it. If you look on the left, I've essentially created my playlist of what's going into any particular service. Now, we noticed that our yard site and Misha Berach lists, for instance, are lists for people who are in need of healing, or the names that we're remembering on any given week of people who have passed away. So for instance, people share names with us that go on a list, and rather than read them, I can do, and let me switch this over so that you can all see it. Oh, of course, it's not there. We erase the videos on a week-to-week basis, but I have a scrolling list of names. And then if any additional names need to be added, we can do that, and it saves an inordinate amount of time.
So what I've understood from this, Brett, is that ProPresenter, like any heavyweight program, has quite a steep learning curve. And actually, you're not going to get a lot out of it until you put a lot into it at the beginning.
So there's a couple of things, right? The first thing is that there is a steep learning curve. And anyone who's watching this and saying, ooh and ah, I'm going to get this, and this is going to be for next Friday night, next Saturday, we're going to do this, and it's going to be great. I would say, don't do that. It's a bad idea. There is a learning curve, but it's like anything else. The more that you use it, the more that you get familiar with where things are located. And it may be that your service, you may not be able to do stuff for people at home and stuff for people in the room in the same week. You may need to add that later, but that's okay. It has that ability within the software.
So I get that side of it, and I think you've given us some really interesting demonstrations of how you can use it. And particularly, I can see, as we're all familiar with the idea and concept, you have to adjust certain prayers for times of the month. You have to adjust certain prayers for different things that are related to it. And so you're saying that you've got literally the block, and you can say, here is the big block of that whole thing. And then I can actually say, this is the relevant sections to bring in, or the different melodies, et cetera, et cetera. The thing I think that we haven't covered really here, Brett, is you mentioned before about that it was a pain in the backside to bring this in. And then you mentioned that this has become easier. I know there's a lot of different ways of using ProPresenter. Is it NDI? What is it now that it's typically used under?
So the signal going to my main screens in the sanctuary, and the signal going to the stage displays, the ones that I am seeing from the Bima, those are being run over SDI to HDMI that are running out to the projectors.
Okay, so for everybody out there, that just to clarify, although we have covered very briefly, HDMI, SDI cabling, NDI is over the network. Yeah. So
the NDI signal is coming from the computer, and it's going out to my streaming computer. In this case, it's going out from ProPresenter, and it's coming into OBS, right, which we talked about before, as an NDI signal that's just overlaid on top of the video.
Okay. So that's where, when you were showing it before, you were showing stuff over the top and you're bringing it in, and you were bringing in the information of that was laying over your camera at the same time. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of questions which I think are going to be relevant. And I'm going to take the first one that I can see here, that's here from Cindy Friedman. Ask, what's the advantage of people at home not seeing the design of the background?
So first of all, you have limited space, right? If you want people to be able to see you, for instance, if instead of like a little box at the top right-hand corner, like we would have in Zoom where you're sharing the screen, if you want people to be able to see both you, whoever's leading the service, as well as the words, it means that the background is probably going to be distracting. And I don't want to take away from whatever the leaders, the service leaders feel of the service is just because I inserted graphics for people to see in the sanctuary. There are, for instance, times that like I've changed that. Let's see. So when I use this during, let's see if it works. Nope, it didn't like it. We did Starry Night one night, and I took the background that you can see here, and I shrunk it down so that the lower third was a part of the Van Gogh that people could see at home. But for most of the time, you probably want people to be watching your video. You want people to be able to see
Makes a lot of sense. So you were actually able to add in the information. So I think to answer it, in my view, and then please anybody else come in here, you're able to give people at home the room which they wouldn't be able to see, and the liturgy or the instructions or whatever you want to call it at the same time, without having to swap between two screens or ending up with a really compromised view, which you sometimes get in Zoom, where somebody is just a tiny little square in the corner and it's lost. Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you for that. We got another question which has been you sort of touched on already from Yuval Karen. How well does ProPresenter support Hebrew?
So it's a loaded question. So
what, Hebrew or ProPresenter?
So ProPresenter handles Hebrew for the most part, like any other piece of software in Windows, if you have support for it. The problem is, I don't know if you noticed,
we're not seeing your share at the moment.
Let's see. Oh, it got angry. Let's see. The software got a little bit angry. But what happened is there is a displacement of the vowels, and it's slightly to the left of each one of the letters. And so
am I right? That's just a problem in Windows.
It's a ProPresenter problem.
It's a ProPresenter. Yeah, but is it in both Windows and Mac?
No. So on the Mac version, it works just fine. And it's the reason that I ended up.
Okay, so it's the
reason that I ended up using and going and buying a Mac for my sanctuary. But if you have people using Windows, I edit my slides in Windows at home and I send them to the Mac, and the Mac imports them, and it looks fine. It's all the same.
So we may unpack a point here together then, which is that the Mac. You could actually just use a Mac as your presentation computer.
Yes.
You don't necessarily do it. And I think I've just got a question here. Sorry, my mouse has just decided to walk across the screen. We had a question very similar to this. There we go. From Karen Berger, who says, I'm restricted to a Windows system. Does the program still have issues with Windows? Can it work with Teams?
I'm not sure what you mean by can it work with Teams, unless.
So I think there's two questions here. I think the first one is, it restricted
Teams,
to Windows.
Teams is in multiple people, not Teams is in Microsoft.
No, MS Teams, Microsoft Teams. So I think I can answer to it. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. It can run under Windows, but if you're going to do this, in professional or use it, it's almost like you need a dedicated computer running ProPresenter, and it's probably ideal to get a Mac Mini or something.
You need a dedicated computer no matter what.
Yeah. Okay. So even if the rest of everything else you do in the room is running Windows, this is there. And on Teams, Brett, you're putting that over the top of your screen. Is it NDI? No, it's not NDI. It's just on your virtual.
So it's I'm using a virtual camera, but the signal is coming into OBS as NDI, and it's just an added signal over the top of my video.
Great.
I can show you if it. Let's see. So let's switch. Share. Let's do. Here. So this is my camera signal. This is theoretically my NDI signal that is coming in. It looks right. The software gods have been angered, and so it's not displaying anything at the moment. I have to restart OBS. But this allows me to essentially put this over whatever I want. And the way that I use it in the sanctuary, as well as the way that people see it at home, is when for instance, we display ads for upcoming events before any given service. And what'll happen is, as those signals are coming in, I tell it to take over the entire screen. I don't want people to see my sanctuary or the bima before the service starts. I want them to only at home be seeing a scrolling list of ads. And so they are able at that point to see only this. This is all they're seeing, is our upcoming events. And then as soon as the service begins, it sends a signal to clear the NDI video output, and it switches back over to whatever I wanted to display.
Got it. So going back to what we were last week, when we were talking about virtual cameras with Rabbi David, who's using the example of Ecamm, you need to, with everything that we're hearing, and I think this is a common thing that there is no one solution in this. There is no one. This is the absolute. You just need this, and everything else works. So we know where we're going with this.
So ProPresenter in version 7 added the ability to stream directly from the software. It also created the ability for you to bring in video signals over however you want, whether it's wired or over NDI. So I can pull a video signal directly into ProPresenter. I can then do all of the graphics and overlays and text on top of them as a different layer. And then I can broadcast it out directly from the software. They tried to minimize the number of people that, especially during the pandemic, that people had available to be running everything.
So we've got a question. I've got to mark it. I do this. Sometimes I click on the wrong button and I mark the question as unanswered when I meant to push it up. We had a question from Deb Kirsch. How does this compare to vMix? Does it all pull in various outputs to one visual input, say multiple clergy on different devices to have them on the screen together in different layouts? Or is it strictly to sync variable outputs, which is amazing? Do you need both?
So it is capable of doing a lot. I am not currently using it to do video switching. As much as I trust it, I don't trust it that much right now. And it's still fairly new to the integration in the software.
Okay, we've got Tobias. Did you want to come in on that point?
I have another use case that I'm interested about, which is that I use something called singular.live, which creates a browser source that you can then use as your overlay layer, which allows multiple Zoom participants to have the output show up on different screens at the same time. So could you use ProPresenter to have 3 different Zoom instances have the overlay show up at the same time?
So I can create as many virtual outputs as I want. The only limitation on the number of virtual outputs is either my imagination or theoretically it was limited up until the latest version. You can now create unlimited versions or outputs as you can imagine. So I can have announcements in the lobby, for instance, or announcements going anywhere to a different room. That can be one layer. My sanctuary slides can be a different layer. My Zoom slides can be a different layer in whatever format they look. I can have a completely different display for the people up on the Bima. On any given week, I'm usually using somewhere around 5 to 7 outputs.
See, I could see a really interesting example that you could use, which is what you're doing is you're not necessarily pushing out to the lobby. You're not necessarily putting out the whole of where you are, but you're actually putting which part of the service you're in at that point. So people know where it's coming to. So it's coming up to the various different it's Kaddish is coming up, et cetera, et cetera. So they know where they're coming for people who are having to run security or having to do, that are sitting outside, so they can see things.
Leo, I saw Marty's hand go up.
Yeah, Marty, thank you.
Get my microphone unmuted. Hi, yeah, thanks. So what I find really interesting about ProPresenter that makes it different from all of the other software that we've been discussing is that it brings in all of your resources, potential sources of live video, recorded video, still frames, slides, all kinds of things, brings them all into one place, and then allows you to essentially program everything that you want to show during the entire service from beginning to end. You're pre-programming it. So you know what your order of service is, you know where things are going to happen and when, and what you're going to want to show during those times. Am I getting this right so far? And so you're able to pre-program your entire show rather than switching it live. You're creating what you call a playlist, and then each of those elements, those visual elements, you can program how long you want it to show.
So you're talking about automation, which is absolutely possible. It's one of the features I was not going to talk about today. So they have slides for a lot of churches are tied to the music. And because of the limited number of people that they have either volunteering or on staff, what they have done is to allow MIDI control from like a keyboard or another MIDI instrument to set off a chain of dominoes for any particular given piece of music. So the number of seconds that, for instance, these words appear on the screen is different than the amount of time that the next slide's words are on the screen. And all of that is controlled by like a click track. I can bring in like pre-recorded audio. I can bring in all of those different things. The real reason that I wanted it is because it gives me the ability to give like the bouncing ball for the prayers, but it's complicated.
So can I ask a question that relates to that one, which we've had from Yuval Karen, which is it possible for a rabbi pastor to control the slides, or does it need another person to do it?
So I can tell you that it is entirely possible for a rabbi or a cantor or a pastor to be running the slides during a service, right? Many of us have done it in PowerPoint. It is completely possible within ProPresenter. I would tell you that you should probably not do that. It is.
What I was going to ask, Brett, what I was going to ask is if you've got a ProPresenter computer at the back of the sanctuary, are you able to remote control buttons or just the forward and next on something like an iPad or on a Stream Deck?
So they have software for both Android and for iPad, as well as iOS and iPad OS. So I can control the slides from any of my devices. Their Android version of it is not as wonderful as the iOS versions.
Well, yeah, I can see from what you were saying earlier about it being a Mac. It's not surprising. Yeah. Okay. But I think there's some really, because you can unpack this. This is a big problem that I think that those that are doing virtual services have come across already, which is that the control of liturgy is quite difficult for somebody that isn't the service leader to be controlling liturgy, because they don't know the exact speed that the person giving the presentation is going to go to.
I have
you're already grey screen at the moment, Brett. Yeah.
So before I'm fixing it, hang on. Before the pandemic,
that's it. You're back.
Before the pandemic, I had, I don't know, maybe 12 or 15 teenagers who trained on the software. And for any given service, they run the slides. They know exactly how to follow us. If by some fluke things don't go according to plan, one of us can jump on an iPad and can just skip a prayer or a song or a reading. We can add a song or a reading, and it will pop up in the playlist. And it allows you the flexibility of being able to intervene when you need, but also to be paying attention and to really put your attention towards leading rather than on trying to figure out which slide comes next and when it needs to happen. It's not always so easy from while you're leading.
It's super, but I've seen it in both ways. You know, when you don't have the service leader actually controlling the slides, particularly when you've got silent moments in the service, it's how does the person who is controlling the slides know when the service continues and moves forward without, you know, it's finding that balance. Although it sounds like, Brett, that you're running a ProPresenter Cheder.
No, it's like that.
It's an extra class in Cheder instead of doing Hebrew.
Look, when the rabbi's done with silent meditation, or when the cantor begins to sing whatever is about to come, the kids know to put on the slide when the words appear. Otherwise, you're always going to be holding an iPad and looking at it and not looking at the people in the congregation, or you're not going to be looking at your camera.
Agreed. I want to move on to some other questions, which is the next one is actually from Marty. Marty has asked, how many different video outputs is ProPresenter capable of, and are they physically, and how are they physically outputted?
So it's another loaded question. So the video outputs are determined by whatever machine you're using. So for instance, the iMac that I have ProPresenter in my sanctuary running on, it's capable of 3 display port outs, mini display ports. So that's the number of physical outputs that it has, but I'm running an additional, I think, 3 or 4 NDI outputs. One of the benefits of a piece of networking wizardry that is only on the Mac is what's called Siphon, which allows you to take a video signal and send it out virtually with a lot less impact on resources, for instance, whereas NDI can be very resource intensive. Siphon is much less, and then I can convert my Siphon to an NDI signal or to something else. But it's the limitation as far as
basically it's a limitation of the computer to some extent, but there are tricks to get around this.
You can have as many virtuals as you want.
For those watching, we're coming close to the end of our questions on the first hour. We've got our second hour questions coming up. There's lots there. Please start. That's your opportunity to ask anything that isn't just about ProPresenter, about anything else that you want to talk about this week. We've got a panel. The panel has increased, as you've seen, since we started. So there's lots of people here to answer your questions. So the next question, which is goes along the same line, was a question from Yuval Karen. Does ProPresenter work with NDI? I think we've covered that. And as far as we can see, as you've said, it works as an NDI source. I know that Yuval is a big proponent of NDI. He's got all of his cameras set up there. So he could be using this to push stuff around his sanctuary and to push it to people at home and via the OBS box that he's got. Yeah. Okay. Interesting question here from Tobias. Can ProPresenter bring a Zoom participant into the sanctuary service?
So you can pull anything in using NDI. Right? You can pull another program, whether it's Zoom or anything else, as an NDI signal into the software as a camera, in this case, a virtual camera, and you can absolutely do that. So there are times that I've brought in Zoom, even though we're live streaming. Yeah, what's up, Tobias?
Does NDI also bring in the audio?
If you wanted to. You have to choose whether you want to embed NDI audio or whether you want to separate it out because you're doing it using a mixer or something like that.
Gotcha. Thanks.
But it'll bring in anything into ProPresenter that it sees as, so it'll bring in an NDI source, is what you're saying.
It'll bring in an NDI source, and then we'll give you the option of whether you want that to be just video or video and audio.
So the key here is how to get Zoom into NDI, but we can cover that. Or Tobias.
Well, we could hold it, but I was going to expand the question to with the full panel of what is the best way to bring a Zoom participant into the sanctuary, which I think is the $1 million question for many of us.
Who else, other panelists? I've got some comments on this.
Sure.
So this is a fascinating area. So there are two ways that I've seen it done. John, are you going to come on this one?
No, I'll let you go ahead, and then I'll.
Okay, one of the ways I've seen it is that people will put a Zoom's call in. They will bring, if you ever click on Zoom, when you're in Zoom, if you click on, a really good tip is that you go into the video settings or your settings general and click use dual monitors. Once you click use dual monitors, you can then take anybody that's in the Zoom call and you can pin them to the second window, and you make that window big. You get a 1080p if you're in 1080p version of that person, and then you can screen grab that. Other suggestions? John?
I would use.
Well, what I was going to say is that, what we really have happening here is when the pandemic hit, we all went into virtual, and we were sending things out, and we didn't have to, whatever we did as best we could with whatever tools, Zoom or other displays. Now that we're coming back, this is hybrid. We have, how do we match what we're doing in a physical location with the Roomies and the Zoomies, and the expectation for greater production. So if you look at this software, it's really incredible to be able to control what you had on multiple screens in a sanctuary. It lets you control music, video, and the like. And now you have to figure out how to send that out to the room, but you also have to figure out how to send it out in Zoom. And where you might have had something to read on a screen on the side of the stage, where that would probably not be readable unless it was full screen in a Zoom. And so what we're really trying to do is come up with multiple production streams. What I find interesting about this tool is it's very different than video switching and OBS or whatever tools you're using to switch a Zoom broadcast, which is not the same things that you would be using to present content in a face-to-face meeting. So this really is sort of the best of all possible worlds, but in many ways it's walking, chewing gum, patting yourself on the head, and skipping at the same time. So, I think when Brett, you talk about this is not for the faint of heart, it's because any one of those tasks would require an operator, and you're trying to roll it all up into one, and that does make it very confusing.
I think that's where we are, though. If we look at where we were a year ago, and it is roughly a year ago, if we were having this discussion about doing any of this in Zoom and bringing services in and there, everybody's like, this is so alien to everybody's needs. And now we're sitting there going, well, we can bring things in. We can record this part of the service. We can bring in blessings from grandparents who live in another continent. We can bring everything together, and we're starting to see how we can expand that. And it isn't, I think what you've said there, Brett, you've been on a journey with ProPresenter for 5 years. John was talking about the fact that he's been using Zoom for a number of years. We're all catching this up and catching up. And the whole point of this is to learn where there are bits that fall over and which bits actually are working. We've got a couple of other last questions on here. And I think this is a good one from Yuval. Karen again, what is the minimal decent spec needed for a Mac machine to drive ProPresenter?
So any of the new M1s, you can theoretically run ProPresenter on a MacBook Air, a MacBook Pro, or like a Mac Mini. To be honest, the Mac Mini is probably at least for the M1s, the best one that you could do right now. And even if you get it with the max of 16 gigs and like throw a 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte hard drive in, it's only going to cost you maybe $1,200, $1,300, and it's more than capable of running it.
Yeah, I would say that the Mac Minis, they're deceptive about what they can deliver for the price and the spec, because they just completely work in a different way to everything that we've seen. And for anything video related, encoding, doing anything, crunching videos through, they just chew through it so fast, and they're a really great platform in that environment. We've got one sort of question that is related to this. So this is our last question really on ProPresenter, and then I'll ask Brett to wrap up. But there was a question which is related to, do NDI cameras require both an Ethernet and a coax cable? So we've kept talking about NDI here, and we keep talking about it, and we mix around here. And I'll just say that an NDI camera uses, a true NDI camera is using just the Ethernet cable. It's got the picture is going down. You're sending the picture and the control down there. You can also send power, but the main thing is picture and control. But if you're using cameras, and if you remember back to when we had the guys in from PTZ Optics, and we talked about other things like that, they typically will also recommend that you use the SDI cable, the coax cable, because you get the full fat version of the picture. Brett, back to you on last minute on a wrap up on anything on ProPresenter.
So I would say optimistically that it was a game changer. It was a game changer for me. It was a game changer, I think, for the way that my congregation is able to both participate and interact with our services virtually as well as in person. And it was a game changer for the people having to run things behind the scenes, and my ability to be able to not have to do stage diving in the middle of a service to go fix something. Everything now seems to run very stably. Everything now, instead of creating huge presentations, I just drag whatever prayers I want into a list for a given evening, and I'm done. Like it's really that simple, and it took a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. If you are brave enough to undertake this task, it is a lot of work, but you end up with a product that both looks and feels way more professional than anything that most of us were using before.
I think it's going to be interesting. I think this is the one. This is, there are two products out there in my mind which are almost, you start at one level and you go up. The first one is ProPresenter. The other one is vMix. I don't know anybody that jumped straight in. Everybody started at OBS and then moved up to vMix, but I've seen people shift along that path. I've seen the same here with ProPresenter, that people start off at PowerPoint, and they maybe, or their keynote, and then eventually they start finding that it just runs out. I mean, I know one group that it's not a synagogue, but somebody else that's doing religious stuff in Judaism stuff, and they just ran out every single time they put their PowerPoints together. There's so many videos embedded that the PowerPoint just couldn't cope with the number of videos embedded, and they were running in at venues, and it was just crashing because it couldn't cope.
So the reason that you have a dedicated machine most of the time to run ProPresenter is because of all of the videos, because of all of the video backgrounds, because of all of that stuff going on behind the scenes. The software is rendering constantly. It's basically doing an equivalent to something that would happen in Creative Cloud, and we don't anger the ProPresenter way by trying to run other things on the same machine. It can theoretically do it, but it can get angry. But the possibilities are honestly endless when it comes to this. It's I simply insert like 6 video clips or whatever I want into a presentation, and I just drag them in, and that's it.
So we have a last quick question that came in from Tobias in the panel. Brett, is your ProPresenter library for share or for sale?
It will probably be for sale. at some point. For those of you out there who don't want to recreate the wheel, not yet. Almost.
And on that point, I'd like to say thank you so much, Brett, for what you've done today and giving us it's been a really interesting. I didn't think we could unpack ProPresenter in the time that we've had, but I think it's a starting point.
There's another 100 features. It has so many things, but this is
absolutely.
A good time.
Okay, we're going to move on to our second hour. We've only got a couple of questions, but they're actually really interesting 2 questions, or our second half hour. So if anybody else has any questions that aren't to do with ProPresenter, please put them in the box, put them in on social media, put them in on here. You know, we will cover them and we will go through them. So the first question up, which has been upvoted 5 times and is quite popular, from Rabbi David, who I know had to disappear, but we'll ask a question. On late night shows, they have a few people in the audience and guests zooming in. How do they handle the audio feedback loop of the guests, audio feeding back through the house microphones? That seems to be one of the problems we're trying to address in hybrid services. Before I open this up to the panel, I'm going to say we are going to cover this in detail next week, but I would really like, as a 101 starter on some of the points on this, Marty.
So there's a couple of different technologies, and there's a couple of different aspects to this. So the first one is called a mix minus, and that essentially stops the audio from Zoom going back out to Zoom, and it stops the sound from the studio coming back to the studio from Zoom. So it breaks that feedback loop electronically. Then, but the question really is about how to prevent the sound from the loudspeakers getting into the microphones, which is a different question. But the first one was worth mentioning. So there are 2 ways to do this. First of all, the volume level in the studio is not very loud to begin with. It's not blasting. The second thing is the way that the speakers are oriented in the room is done very carefully to send sound to where the people are sitting, but not reflect off the walls and ceiling. And that minimizes the reflections coming back to where the stage is. So the stage is actually created to be a fairly quiet zone. It's not hearing the loudspeakers from the room. And then finally, a certain amount of echo cancellation can also be applied. And that's an electronic thing that Zoom has this feature built into it, but can also be done in the studio.
I think brilliant. We're going to go through all 3 of those elements next week. And that is a really good starting point on there. So next week, this is the subject we're going to be covering, which is how do we find and how do we make this key component, audio, work when you've got people in the room and when you've got people on Zoom, and how do we bring those 2 things together? Our last question in the box today, but it's actually quite an interesting one here, is how has virtual technology, or we've got some more questions coming in, how has virtual technology affected attendance during the pandemic? How has it increased? How has it decreased? This is coming from Ari, who's on the panel. Ari, before we answer the question, what's your experience from where you are based? What do you see?
Well, as I said, I stopped going to synagogue a long time ago, and I'm not connected to any of the present ones in my community, so I really can't say. To the best of my knowledge, we don't do this over here. So I'm very curious about it.
I think
I can speak to an off-topic point. That is just to say that the workarounds have been to hold service in open spaces. There's literally one in the neighborhood where I live, which is beneath in the open space beneath a particular building, and certainly in the outdoor spaces of synagogues. Again, I also see that in my community. But using virtual technology such as we're talking about, I've not seen that here.
Oren, and then Tobias.
So first of all, the Israeli and the American Jewish experience are so radically different. Even in the non-Orthodox world in Israel, anything to do with Hashmal b'Shabbat, anything to do with technology on Shabbat is considered to be a red line. So even though halachically we can talk about this from here till eternity, but in Israel it seems to be a much bigger taboo than it is in the States. And I think I said that before in a previous panel, that 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, my board voted down the suggestion to start streaming services. Everybody thought it was really weird. For all sorts of reasons. Some of them to be they thought it was not traditional to have screens in the sanctuary or cameras in the sanctuaries. Some people were outraged by the idea that they will be seen on the internets, but then the pandemic hit and we had to adapt. Because we are, this is not, where my parents live in Israel, there are 11 synagogues within, down the street. None of them are Ashkenazi, by the way. But we here in Elmira, we are the only synagogue in about a 75-mile radius. We're serving a very wide area. And we found that our members that had to drive 45 minutes each direction for services now can come, and they come every week. They can log on. So we actually seen a pretty substantial increase in attendance from people that did not come before. We did see a few people that stopped coming. There were a few people that used to be there weekly and we haven't seen in all year for all sorts of reasons. But surprisingly, people adapted to this very, very quickly. And I always kid that some of our saftot, our little old ladies, are now will start working for Google once the pandemic is over, because they really took to it like a fish to water. It's amazing.
Tobias.
Speaking of Saftot, at Temple Israel here, we have an 110-year-old congregant who comes to every Friday night service in person, and it took her a bit to for someone to come over, set up an iPad, whatever, but now she comes online and holds court at the end during the breakout rooms moment, and again, adapting quite easily to it. I'd say our attendance overall, we're a very big synagogue, but our average attendance is up on Zoom as it was in person, especially in Minnesota in the winter where weather can drive people away. Being able to, put on a program, not only just services, but an educational program that we might used to have to cancel for certain weather events can now go on as planned online. And we're getting a lot of Zoom participation.
So I think expanding the question, just as you've asked it, which is how has virtual technology affected attendance? I think there are two sides to it, and Tobias started talking about it. I think for services, it has enabled people who maybe never could have gone for different reasons. They were housebound, they had issues where they didn't like to go out on these things, are suddenly able to see and attend services that they couldn't. I think we can get difficult. I think this isn't the panel to be talking about halakhic issues on this, because if we were, we wouldn't be here anyway. We're not trying to advocate people changing those things. We're just saying this is the technology. But the one area that I think is amazing is the expansion and the ability to do education and to be able to bring in the right people. Just take this, for example. We've had a panelist on the last 7. This is our 5th, I think, session. We've had world-leading people being able to give instruction to people who are leading services and running synagogues around the world. People who actually are on the ground in different countries, in different environments, and giving their experience. Now, you put on one of those in one place, you can get, if you're really lucky, you'll get somebody to fly 150 miles or come in that sort of distance. we're able to do this. So it is expanding that. And I think we're going to see that in attendance. We're going to see that in the quality that's coming back. Tobias.
Sorry, glitched out for a moment, but
you had your hand up. I saw.
Yeah, the did it fly the coop? It might. I'll get it back in one sec.
Okay. We'll move on to the next question then. Maybe we'll come back to it. I'm going to jump quickly over, but I'm going to go this question for you, which is back to Brett. If we were going to lead a service offsite, such as a funeral home, could you utilize ProPresenter as a package there?
Yes. So it depends on how you're going to be doing it. I have ProPresenter running on a couple of laptops, and I can absolutely bring in whether it's a virtual camera or an actual camera. I've done funerals where I've brought the video signal in, and I had someone running slides so that the people at home on Zoom were able to follow along with the liturgy that was mostly the 23rd Psalm and the Kaddish, but they were able to participate or follow along. It depends on why, and it depends on how robust of a volunteer group you have.
Yeah, can imagine. Tobias.
My mind circled back, which was that one opportunity that the virtual offers is anonymous participation in Jewish events, which Zoom doesn't offer. But we've noticed that even in very in-person kind of things we've tried to do on Zoom, such as a Passover Seder, there's with the Zoom offering and a Facebook Live recast of the Zoom, some people were choosing to come into the Facebook and stay for the whole time. So you'd think, oh, Seder, that's the one where everyone wants as much interaction, but the anonymous option has value, which you don't have if you walk in the building. I've also had, for example, congregants that are disgruntled with where they are and want to synagogue shop without being known for their disgruntlement. And so that's another thing I want to bring up from the last question. Sorry about the delay.
That's all right. That's okay. So our last question, which is more on the technical side, which is from Tobias. I'm starting to pay attention to the colors patterns to get a better picture on the webcam, Logitech 920. Does the same principles apply for high quality PTZ cameras? Anybody on the panel? Marty, and I'll come back after that.
I would say yes. I think there's I don't know how much of a distinction I would draw between a webcam and a PTZ camera per se. It's all video, and video has some patterns and colors that it likes and some that it doesn't like so much. Lighting has a lot to do with how a video camera is going to see a subject. If the lighting is not sufficient, colors will look off and patterns will do strange things. So in general, you want to avoid stripe lines that are thin and close together. You want to avoid very close dotted patterns. Large dots, splotches, that's fine, but the closer they are together, the camera can see it as an interference with the way that it scans pictures.
So what I would say with this, and this is also a question which I maybe will ask next week because I want to get some more information on this. There's a whole raft of levels of cameras out there, and maybe we have never come to this, but you start off with at different levels, and you see, particularly what you see is there's a big range of PTZ cameras, from the security ones that you can get right up to the pro ones, which are very expensive. But what I've seen is that, as Marty said, is the lighting. I've got blue light behind me because I found that when I had different color lightings, Aries got blue lights behind him as well. And you'll see that blue lighting brings a person forward much clearer than certain other colors because it doesn't interfere with the color of the skin tones. By looking at that, you'll see that I look a bit redder and a bit warmer than if I say, if you look at something like Tobias and bring Tobias in play, or you look at Oren, who are on very lighter color backgrounds, you'll see there's a big difference to how the skin tones appear on there. And one of the really good ones in here is John, and you look at John, who's on a gray background, and you can see that it just brings all the colors and the definition of everything that you're looking at forward on there. John, what camera are you running?
I'm running this today. I'm coming in on HDMI from a Huddle Cam HD into an ATEM switcher.
So that is basically a webcam, but it's an upper level.
I could put the whole earth behind me, whatever.
Sorry, Tobias.
Slightly different gray.
Slightly different gray. Tobias.
Do you think that do you think white taluses are to be avoided? And since cream is also skin colored, should we be moving to colored talesim?
I think that's a really good question that causes maybe we could do a whole session on different color taluses and what you should be wearing, because
my wife sells these, so you know.
Okay, and it is hard. That is a good question, Marty.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, going back to video and how camera interprets what it sees, like sound, like audio, there's a dynamic range from dark to white, all right, from black to white, and everything in between is dynamic range. And when you have a lot of white and then a lot of dark, the contrast is way too much, right? If you have something that's bright white next to something that's really dark, right? That contrast right there and right next to each other is a lot. So it depends on what else you're wearing. It depends on what the backdrop is, right? And you don't want to have too much contrast, and if you're lighting. So, the other thing is that when you light them, right, you can have that white be up here. And so that makes it like bloom, and you can't really see it very well. So
I think we're going to have to unpack this. Marty, there is a lot to unpack, and we've got about 15 seconds. So I just want to go to John, and then we're going to wrap up.
Well, I was just going to say, I have a shirt that I look like I'm a Maurice pattern. So you could take your clothes, put it in front of your camera, and get a good idea of what's going to work and not work. But
that's great. So thank you to the panel. Thank you so much to Brett, who has unpacked a lot on ProPresenter. I now understand ProPresenter far more than I did before. And also I realize I think we're not even through chapter 1.5 of a 16 chapter book on ProPresenter. So, but it's really interesting. For those of us who are in Zoom, we are going to go over to the after session Zoom meeting. So please join us. If you're not in Zoom and you didn't join us in Zoom and you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, you can click on the link to join us in Zoom, and then it will give you the link to there. This has been a really good session. Next week, we're going to be covering audio and how we deal with audio in the hybrid environment. That is probably the hardest thing that we're ever going to deal with, and it's the bit that I think is going to cause the most amount of pain for everybody as we go forward. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much to the panel, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting.